Why did the room go quiet the moment she walked in, even though no one was looking directly at her? The briefing table was crowded with men who'd known each other for years, and yet somehow, the presence of one woman shifted the air in a way no one wanted to acknowledge. Boots scraped, papers shuffled. Not a single voice addressed her, but every sense in her body felt the weight of their sidelong thoughts. She set her file down without a sound. Not hesitation, precision. The kind of quiet movement learned by someone who'd spent years trying to disappear in rooms where her competence was doubted before she spoke a word. The patch on her sleeve, the one they'd already judged without asking, rested against her shoulder like a memory no one here deserved to know. Someone at the far end of the table coughed under his breath, a humorless attempt to mask whatever was itching behind his smirk. She didn't look at them. Eye contact wasn't necessary to feel dismissal. The commander leading the briefing, a tall man whose voice carried the authority of too many deployments, didn't introduce her. He didn't have to. Officially, she wasn't here to be liked. She was here because she was assigned and someone upstairs thought she was necessary. The team didn't share that opinion. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Still, she stood near the far chair and waited, her posture straight but not proud, controlled but not cold. The map projected on the wall flickered with coordinates, topography, and a curving line drawn in red. She absorbed everything, every route, every entry and exit point, every blind corner where accidents became folded flags and folded hands at gravesides. The others stared ahead as though pretending she didn't exist might erase the orders that included her. But there was something no one in that room knew, something that started long before this mission, something inked into skin for reasons not meant to be shared. Not yet. A voice beside the projector broke the hush. "We'll run insertion before first light," the commander said. "Primary breach team goes in through the west corridor. Secondary eyes on the ridge. Sniper cover from—" He paused briefly, glancing at his notepad, then continued. "Position 3-1. Asset will move with Overwatch until green light." Asset, she knew the word meant her. They wouldn't say her name if they could avoid it. Someone near the center of the table shifted in his chair and muttered just loud enough for a few to hear. "Guess we're bringing souvenirs now." A couple of men snorted under their breath. Her hand didn't tighten. Her jaw didn't shift. She gave them nothing to push against. Calm was a weapon, and she'd learned to sharpen it quietly over the years. The commander didn't correct them. He moved on to call signs, whether intel, possible resistance. The storm rolling in from the east could complicate exfil, but no one in the room mentioned complications beyond their own discomfort at sharing oxygen with a woman who'd been assigned the job they assumed belonged to one of them. Minutes passed like hours. The plan laid itself out in words and diagrams, and the room pretended her presence was paper-thin, easily disregarded. She memorized every detail and refused to let their indifference dictate her focus. Judgment didn't alter coordinates. Ego didn't change wind speed. Silence didn't erase skill. When the briefing ended, chairs scraped back. Conversations rose, but not toward her. Men gathered in little clusters, comparing assignments, cracking jokes about gear malfunctions and weather forecasts. She collected her file, closed it carefully, and turned to leave. Near the door, someone called out, "Hey, you're on Overwatch. Thought they needed someone with real trigger time." She paused, not because his words hurt, but because reflex begged her to respond. Instead, she kept walking. Experience had taught her that some arguments weren't worth the bullets. The hallway outside the briefing room smelled of coffee burned hours ago and damp concrete. Her boots echoed in rhythm with her breath. She could have gone to the ready bay to check her kit, but she didn't. Not yet. Instead, she took the back stairway, the one most people overlooked, until she reached the rooftop access. The metal door groaned faintly when she pushed it open. The night air met her like a question she didn't need to answer. Wind tugged at the stray hairs near her temple. The sky was wide, cloud-thick, and humming with distant thunder. She walked to the edge of the graveled ledge and stopped near the low, retaining wall. From here, the base looked like a patchwork of steel and shadow. Vehicles hummed below. Voices drifted from a motor pool somewhere out of sight. Lights sparked from the airfield where someone was testing a rotor system that didn't care who doubted who. She exhaled slowly. Not relief, not frustration, just acknowledgement of the space between where she'd been and where she'd have to stand again in a few hours. There was a time when she might have spoken up in that briefing, challenged a remark, defended herself, reminded them why she wore the tattoo on her arm in the first place. But that time had cost her more than pride. Silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. Let them think she was here by accident. Let them believe she was a symbol, an ornament, a political checkbox. They had no idea what silence could hide. Memory tugged uninvited. A different room, different uniforms, someone laughing at the faded ink on her forearm before the world learned what it meant, before a man with more salt than ego stood and saluted her in front of them, and every mocking sound in that room fell dead in their throats. But she had never told that story. Let them wonder. Let them stay ignorant. The door behind her creaked again, softer this time. She didn't turn immediately. Footsteps approached with the hesitation of someone unsure whether to speak. "What are you doing up here?" The voice wasn't unkind, but it carried the edge of someone cautious about sounding concerned. She glanced over her shoulder. It was one of the younger operators from the briefing, not one who'd laughed, but not one who'd stopped it either. His expression hovered somewhere between curiosity and discomfort. "Breathing," she said simply. He nodded once, as though that answer made more sense than he'd expected. Storms rolling in. Word is insertion might get pushed up. She looked back out at the horizon, where a line of dark clouds crawled over the distant hills. "Then we'll adjust." He lingered, hands in pockets, shoulders slightly hunched, like someone trying to make themselves smaller without knowing why. After a few seconds, he asked, "That tattoo, what's it from?" She didn't look at him. A choice. He waited, maybe expecting more. When none came, he shifted awkwardly, then walked away. The door closed behind him with a dull thud. She traced the outline of the ink beneath her sleeve with 2 fingers. Not sentiment, reminder. There were names etched in memory that never became headstones. There were missions never written into commendations. And there were moments when respect wasn't spoken, but earned in the spaces between judgment and consequence. Down below, floodlights snapped on near the hangars. Her reflection in the glass-paneled stairwell door caught the faint glow. Calm face, unreadable eyes, someone they considered an outsider, someone they didn't know was once the reason others stood at attention in reverence instead of spite. She descended the stairs without hurry, every step steady, every breath deliberate. In the armory, she set her file on the counter and checked out her rifle. The specialist behind the desk looked at her wristband, then at her face, then scanned the tag without a word. The weapon felt familiar in her hands, balanced, worn in the right places, cold in a way that wasn't unkind. She inspected the barrel, the scope, the adjustments she'd made months ago and never forgotten. The armory light buzzed overhead, flickering slightly, as though uncertain of its own purpose. Another operator walked past, glanced at her gear and smirked. "Hope you know how to use that." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The rifle did not require their belief to function. Later in the prep bay, she laid out her kit with measured care. Medical pouch, range finder, extra battery pack, comms. She checked each item twice, not out of anxiety but because small mistakes lead to large casualties. The same young operator from the rooftop entered the bay, helmet tucked under his arm. He watched her for a few seconds, then said, "They don't know your file, that's all. People assume a lot when they don't know." She kept her eyes on the strap she was adjusting. Assumptions don't change outcomes. He hesitated. "Your Overwatch, that's a lot of trust." She finally looked at him, not challenging, just assessing. "Trust isn't what they gave me. It's what I bring with me." His brow furrowed slightly, then smoothed. He nodded once, as though filing her response somewhere he didn't expect to need but might. "See you on the flight line." When he was gone, the silence returned, but it didn't bother her. Noise wasn't proof of life. Company wasn't proof of worth. Night thinned into early gray before dawn. Men moved like shadows through corridors, shoulders tense with the anticipation that came before any operation. She walked among them without needing to speak. The airfield smelled of fuel and wet wind. The helicopter's rotors idled with a slow churn, waiting. As she approached the bird, someone near the loading ramp muttered to another, "She won't last 5 minutes out there." The reply came as a snicker. She stepped past them, climbed aboard, and took her position near the open side hatch. The headset pressed over her ears with the familiar hum of incoming comms. No one addressed her directly. "Fine." Engines roared to life. The floor vibrated beneath her boots. The world outside blurred into motion. She steadied herself with one hand on the frame and looked out into the fatting dark. Whatever they thought didn't matter. Storms didn't wait for approval. Missions didn't pause for morale. And respect, the kind that silences rooms and stops ridicule mid-breath, was never given freely. It was earned quietly, in moments no one saw coming. And before this mission was over, they would understand what the tattoo meant, even if she never said a word. The first thing she noticed wasn't the cold or the wind clawing at the side of the aircraft. It was the silence inside the comms channel. The kind of silence that wasn't empty, but guarded. Every man on board wore the same expression, focus sharpened by habit, dulled slightly by assumption. She sat near the hatch, rifle angled across her lap, gloved fingers resting against the stock like it was part of her. No introductions. No glances that lasted longer than a second. She could feel their doubt the way some people felt weather pressure, not painful, just present. The helicopter cut through low clouds as if it didn't care what waited below. One of the operators across from her checked his gear for the third time, pretending not to look her way. His name, she recalled from the assignments list, was Riker. Broad shoulders, jaw clenched, the kind of veteran who respected hierarchy but not intrusions. He didn't speak, but she could see the question behind his silence. Why her? The pilot's voice cracked through the headset. ETA 9 minutes, crosswinds heavier than forecast. She adjusted the strap of her harness and looked out at the terrain emerging beneath the thinning mist, dark ridges, scattered pines, the glint of river threads slicing through rock and mud. The kind of landscape where sound traveled slower than bullets. Her call sign hadn't been spoken aloud by anyone on the team yet. They referred to her only through position titles, Overwatch, Asset, Secondary Cover. She didn't correct them. A name meant invitation. Invitation meant expectation. Both were liabilities in places like this. Riker leaned slightly toward the teammate beside him. Not enough to draw notice, but enough to murmur, "If she blows comms, I'm not cleaning up." Before he finished, the pilot's warning drowned the whisper. Turbulence incoming. The helicopter dipped hard enough to make a few helmets thud into the metal wall. She didn't move. Her balance held, spine aligned, eyes still fixed on the window. The wind hammered the frame once, then died into a steady thrum. 8 minutes. She closed her eyes briefly, not to rest, but to align memory with aim. A hillside in another country. A target no one saw coming. The same silence before a first shot that most people mistook for calm. Someone keyed the internal channel. Alpha Team Prep. The men around her straightened, clipped buckles, did all the small rituals that kept hands busy when nerves had nowhere to land. She reached down and checked the latch on her optics case. Smooth, precise, unshaken. A voice crackled through, the commander from the briefing, speaking from the lead bird. "Overwatch, you'll deploy last. Confirm." She pressed the side of her throat mic. Solid. That one word stilled a few shoulders. Not because of the tone, but because she didn't sound nervous or eager or deferential. Just steady. Like someone who already knew the terrain wouldn't decide the outcome. 6 minutes. Cloud cover thickened again, rolling over the ridgeline like smoke spreading across glass. The bird ahead of them shifted elevation, and their pilot mirrored the adjustment. Instruments beeped. No one spoke. She ran her thumb over the worn ridge near the engraving on the rifle stock, a mark she'd carved years ago, when names meant something, when she still believed speeches could change a room. The memory came back without invitation. A hangar, harsher lighting, a crowd of mocking faces pretending not to stare at the ink wrapped around her arm. Then a door opening, heavy footsteps. A SEAL commander with silver in his hair and scar tissue around one eye stepping forward, slow and deliberate. He hadn't said her name. He didn't need to. He looked once at the tattoo, then stood at attention and saluted her, and the room went silent, colder than a battlefield. But these men didn't know that story, and she had no interest in retelling it. 5 minutes. The pilot's tone tightened, adjusting for wind shear, hold position. Riker spoke into comms, copy. The young operator from the rooftop, Hale, if she remembered right, sat near the tail end, eyes forward, fingers tapping his knee. He didn't look at her this time, either out of respect or the uncertainty of how to. A brief static flicker snapped across the comms. Then the commander again, weather's pushing faster than projected. Alternate exfil point may be required. Stick to initial entry. She watched the far stretch of ridge line loom into view. The point marked 3-1 wouldn't be an easy climb, not in this wind, not with a full kit and limited anchor points. But she'd handled worse. Alone. 4 minutes. She checked the bolt, the suppressor, the scope mounts, not because doubt guided her, but because repetition erased hesitation. Every action deliberate, every breath the same count she'd used since her first deployment. One of the operators across from her couldn't stop glancing at the sleeve where the edge of ink sometimes showed. Not nosy, just confused. They'd heard rumors, a woman with a past no one could pin down, who refused interviews, who never listed commendations, who turned down transfer offers others would have killed for. To them, her presence was either a mistake or a statement someone else was making. They'd learned soon enough it was neither. 3 minutes. The pilot's voice dropped low. Approaching drop, stand by for green. Breathing shifted across the cabin, the kind of soundless inhale soldiers make before things go loud or stay silent forever. The young operator keyed in final confirmation. Riker muttered something she ignored. 2 minutes. She leaned slightly, enough to see the valley below. Trees thrashed in the wind like they were trying to uproot themselves and escape whatever was coming. The ridge sloped into darkness where the path they'd follow snaked out of sight. Perfect ground for mistakes. Worse ground for ego. 1 minute. The ramp light shifted from red to yellow. Everyone tensed, checking final gear. She secured her rifle to her harness, clipped the rope guide to the carabiner, and tested the slack with one practiced pull. The first team moved to the ramp. Wind punched through the opening like a warning. Green. 2 dropped fast, disappearing into the dark below. Then 2 more. Riker and Hale next, each swallowed by the night. She counted breaths, not seconds. Timing wasn't measured in numbers out here. It was felt in the air, in the pause between motion and stillness. Her turn. She stepped to the ramp without hesitation. The crew chief glanced at her once, not approval, not concern, just instinctively checking balance. She met his eyes briefly, then stepped into the wind. Gravity grabbed, rope slid, knees flexed to absorb the landing. The ground hit hard but not sloppy. Dirt and rock shifted under her boots. She unhooked smoothly, scanning the incline and the silhouettes scattered across the ridge line. Wind roared in her ears for a moment before the chopper pulled away, and left only the muted static of comms and the dull thud of moving boots. Alpha Team was already advancing toward the ridge crest. She veered away from them, heading toward the higher elevation assigned to her. No one offered help. No one asked if she needed it. Good. The climb bit at her legs. Loose stones skidded downward with each step, but she adjusted her weight, kept her rifle tight and movements deliberate. The world narrowed to breath and ground and the faint rustle of someone ahead failing to move quietly. She reached the outcrop where she'd set up. From here she had eyes on the west corridor approach and an angle over the compound's north edge. She dropped to one knee, unpacked the bipod and assembled her position with practiced silence. Scope adjusted, wind read, distance marked. Below, the team advanced through the trees, shadows folding into darker shadows. Someone muttered a direction. Someone else nearly tripped on a root hidden under debris. She settled prone, cheek against the stock, heartbeat slowing to a rhythm that matched the world around her. Fingers brushed against the tattoo under her sleeve again, not out of nostalgia, but because the habit lived in her bones. A transmission crackled, Alpha in position, awaiting green. Her eyes tracked a figure to the far tree line, Hale, moving slower than the rest, watching angles the others dismissed. He glanced up once, toward the ridge, though he couldn't see her. Maybe he felt the weight of her presence. Maybe he didn't. It didn't matter. She adjusted her sightline and keyed in 2 short clicks on the coded channel, signal ready. Half the team wouldn't know what the clicks meant. The commander would. Seconds passed. Then the voice she'd been waiting for cut through the static, low and certain. Overwatch is set. Alpha has green. No hesitation now. The room that had ignored her hours ago was gone, replaced by terrain that didn't care who believed in her. She tracked movement below, wind curling around her hair, the storm inching closer like a closing fist. Somewhere ahead, their objective waited, unaware that the person covering their lives was the one they doubted most. And before the night was over, something would happen that none of them were prepared to witness. Not yet. The first sound that didn't belong to the night came from the east, a low metallic shift, too deliberate to be wind. She didn't move her head, only her eyes adjusting the scope a fraction. Heat signatures flickered near the outer wall of the compound, faint but patterned. Patrol. 2 men, maybe 3, moving with the slow confidence of those who believe darkness is on their side. She tracked their path, not for the shot, not yet, but to map their timing. Beside her, the earth was cold against her ribs, damp seeping through the sleeve of her uniform where fabric met skin. She barely felt it. Focus had a way of numbing everything that didn't matter. Down below, Alpha Team crawled closer to their breach point. No chatter now. Boots pressed all sound into mud and moss. They weren't a loud unit, but they weren't silent either. Trust in numbers sometimes replaced discipline. She adjusted the angle again, breath even, posture like stone carved into the shape of intention. A voice hushed through the comms, visual on access panel, waiting on confirm. No one asked for her confirmation. They'd forgotten she was part of the sequence, or ignored it. Either way, she responded without speaking, 3 clicks on the encrypted line, the same signal she'd been trained with before half of these men had learned to fire without flinching. The commander's voice followed seconds later from the secondary channel. Alpha, proceed. Overwatch has eyes. Only then did Riker whisper, copy, though the edge in his tone made it clear he still doubted eyes he couldn't see. They advanced. She watched the patrol below loop back toward the north wall. Timing traced itself in her mind like ink forming lines on paper. 15 seconds before they rounded again. Maybe 20 if they stopped to talk. She learned over time that enemies conversed just as much as any other human. Boredom was universal. A soft rustle to her left. Not wind. Her hand shifted toward the sidearm holster before realization settled. Hale. He climbed the rocks slower than she had, breath more labored, but his footsteps were careful enough not to broadcast amateurism. He reached the ridge edge and paused, staying 3 meters back, not encroaching on her sightline. Smart. He didn't speak, just scanned the valley like someone trying to understand what couldn't be taught in a briefing. She didn't acknowledge him, not with words or nods. If he needed reassurance, he'd come to the wrong place. Below, Alpha reached the access panel. One operator knelt, tools in hand, gloved fingers moving with the urgency of someone racing more than time. The wind carried a distant rumble from the storm moving across the ridge behind her. Clouds shifted again, curtaining moonlight. Hale whispered, voice low enough the mic didn't catch it but close enough for her to hear. "You've done this before." She didn't answer. He exhaled once, steadying himself. She could feel his unease, not of danger but of witnessing something he couldn't quite categorize. Respect or fear, it didn't matter. A flicker of light from the compound wall, a cigarette ember glowing near the guard post. She adjusted her scope. The man below inhaled, the ember brightening, then turned his head toward the patrol. Casual, unaware. "Panels open," someone said on comms. She tracked the guard's line of sight, predicting his turn before he made it. The patrol rounded the corner 4 seconds earlier than estimated. Too soon. Riker's voice again. "We're moving in 3, 2. "No," she murmured, not into the mic. But Hale glanced sharply in her direction like he'd heard something in her tone alone. The guard turned his head, eyes narrowing as the patrol raised a hand in vague greeting. Not enough to see Alpha yet, but one more step, and the approach path would align. She didn't wait. Her finger took up pressure, movement and instinct older than their doubt. The shot cracked through a suppressor that coughed more than it barked. The guard dropped before the ember hit the ground. The patrol froze, unsure if what they heard was wind or death. Riker hissed, "What the?" Then the commander's voice, hard and controlled, "Proceed, quietly." Alpha slipped inside the access point in the space, the silence created. Hale stared at the compound below, then back at her. He didn't speak, but something changed in his breathing, steadier but heavier, like realization carried weight. She reloaded with one practiced motion, without moving off the rifle. The storm crept closer. Air thickened with the tension of shifting fronts. Rain wasn't here yet, but it stalked the tree line like an animal preparing to strike. Inside the compound, Alpha's movement went dark. No visual through windows, no sound but clipped transmissions and muttered confirmations. They didn't thank her, not that she expected them to. Hale finally spoke, just above the wind. "How did you know he'd see them?" She didn't look at him, "Because I would have." He absorbed that, quiet again. The kind of quiet that came with learning something you didn't ask to know. Minutes passed. Thunder grumbled somewhere far off. She watched 2 new heat signatures appear near the south tower. They weren't moving rapidly, unaware of the silent breach happening beneath their feet. Hale shifted onto one knee, trying to imitate her posture without drawing attention to the effort. His inexperience wasn't incompetence, just unrealized capability. Another transmission came through, this one from deeper inside the compound. "We've got eyes on target building. Lock engaged. 30 seconds to breach." A pause. Then the sound of something metallic dropping inside the corridor, not from Alpha. Hale stiffened, she didn't. "Secondary contact," she said into her mic, voice low, even. "Level 2 corridor, east approach." They hadn't given her permission to report. She didn't need their permission. Riker responded, disbelief laced into his tone. "We don't see anything east." "Because your angle is wrong," she replied. The commander's voice cut in. "Hold position, Overwatch call it." She adjusted the scope a hair to the right. One hostile stepped into view, then another. No urgency in their walk. Wrong place, wrong time for them. "2 approaching corridor junction," she said. 5 seconds. "Copy," the commander responded. No hesitation now. 4, she counted silently, not aloud. The first man stopped to speak to someone off view. The second shifted his rifle and turned slightly. She fired once. The second man jerked and fell against the wall with a quiet thud. Before the first could react, she fired again. He slumped slowly, like resistance wasn't worth the effort. Hale whispered something she didn't catch. Maybe he didn't mean to say it out loud. Alpha's internal comms lit up with confusion, then clarity. Contacts down, moving now. Riker didn't say a word this time. She scanned again, sweeping the compound perimeter, tracking movement no one else could see yet. Rain finally broke, light at first, carried sideways by wind slicing across the ridge. Droplets peppered the barrel of her rifle, but she blinked only once before adjusting focus. Hale wiped his brow with the back of his glove, though it was rain, not sweat. He stayed silent, learning in the only classroom that ever mattered. Inside the compound, things accelerated: footfalls, whispered commands, breaching charges ready without noise. She could almost feel their pace matching the rain. Then a new voice crackled through, unfamiliar, tense. Someone with comms access but not part of Alpha. Movement north side, 2 units sweeping. Riker again, startled. We don't have visual on north. You don't, she said, cutting him off as her eye tracked the shadowed figures rounding the far outer wall. Hale followed her gaze, barely catching the movement with his naked eye. How many? 3 outside, more behind them. She could take 2 before the third reacted. But their timing would dictate whether Alpha stayed undiscovered or ended up cornered before reaching the objective. The question wasn't if she'd shoot. It was whether she would wait long enough for gravity to shift in their favor. Something in the wind changed direction, temperature, tone. The storm leaned closer. She adjusted her cheek against the stock again. And somewhere below, a decision someone else made hours ago was about to collide with a truth they'd all tried to ignore. Not much longer now. The rain thickened, but not enough to blur the scope. Movement below grew sharper, not softer. Urgency had its own rhythm, and she could feel it spreading through the compound like a breath held too long. The 3 men she'd spotted along the north wall moved with the posture of those responding to something they didn't yet understand. Their rifles were up, scanning shadows, not expecting a perimeter breach but aware enough to sense imbalance. She tracked the lead man, heavier gait, slower reflexes, likely in charge. He paused near the drainage pipe along the wall and raised a hand to signal something to the others. He didn't know he was already marked. Thunder cracked across the sky, closer this time. The wind shoved rain sideways, streaking across her optics. She blinked once, wiped the lens with one quick pass of cloth, and reacquired targets before the men had taken 3 more steps. Behind her, Hale shifted his stance again, less fidget now, more focus. He wasn't breathing like prey anymore, more like someone who'd finally realized distance didn't mean safety. Her finger rested on the trigger without tension. Not yet. Timing wasn't about speed, it was about consequence. If she dropped the leader now, the other 2 would fold outward and search the wrong area. If she waited 3 seconds longer, they'd split enough that one would expose a clear shot line toward the secondary patrol hidden near the fuel crates. She counted heartbeats. 1, 2, 3. She took the first shot. The leader's body dropped with an almost graceful forward collapse, knees buckling as if the ground had asked for him gently. Before the other 2 could react, she pivoted and put a round through the shoulder of the one nearest the crates. He spun, fell backward, rifle clattering uselessly across the gravel. The third froze, instinct, fear, confusion, it didn't matter. She finished it with a quiet exhale. North wall clear, she said into comms, voice steady, almost bored. This time no one argued, not even Riker. A burst of static, then the commander. Alpha is breaching target building now. She shifted the scope across the compound interior, tracing pathways between buildings, checking for heat signs through thin structures. 1 figure inside a storage shed, 2 near the generator stack. Their movements unaware, not her concern yet. Lightning lit the ridge for half a second, bright enough to reveal the grain of rock beneath her, and the streak of water running along the edge of her position. Hale flinched slightly at the flash, then stilled again. He said nothing, but she could feel the unspoken question hovering behind his silence. How many times had she done this? How many nights like this had shaped the kind of stillness she carried like armor? Inside the compound, something crashed, not explosion, but the sound of a door forced against weight. Alpha hadn't gone loud yet, but force had replaced stealth. Someone on their team muttered, "Contact inside," and then more footsteps, more breath, more movement. She shifted the rifle back to her primary angle and waited. Two hostiles ran across an upper walkway, alerted by the noise. The first paused at the railing to look down into the courtyard. His head exploded backward before he could register sight. The second pivoted, searching for muzzle flash. She dropped him just as his panic forced his rifle upward. Hale whispered under his breath, not in fear, but in the kind of awe that came with watching someone do something most people only read about in reports. Another transmission came through, closer to a grunt than a word. "Stairwell secure, level 2 advancing." She checked the corner of her vision through the scope's peripheral and spotted something most of the team wouldn't see, a figure hugging the wall near the inner gate, holding position. Patient. Watching. She adjusted a fraction and zoomed in. Not a guard on rotation. Different gear. Partial mask. Rifle modified, not random security, trained. She fired once. The man dropped to his knees and fell sideways without sound. Even Hale didn't track that one until after the body hit the dirt. She scanned left again, eyes tracing every line of motion in the rain-slicked dark. Her breathing had slowed into something between instinct and memory, like the world around her had narrowed to sound and shape and timing. A voice on comms whispered, "We've got movement near." Handled, she cut in. Static, then silence. No one asked how she knew which movement they meant. Below, a window shattered as Alpha breached the interior of the target building. Shouts followed, not panicked but strained. One word rose through the channel, "Contact." She found the window line and tracked two figures emerging from a side door, weapons up. Alpha's formation split. Riker and Hale's team took the right corridor. Two others moved left. Rain began to hammer now, harder, colder, angled like needles. Her jacket was soaked through the sleeves, hair plastered to her neck, but nothing in her posture changed. She fired before the first hostile cleared the threshold. The body hit the door frame and folded into the mud. The second stumbled over him, disoriented, slipping on wet concrete. She finished him before his hands could find balance. Lightning again, closer, a pulse across the black. Thunder followed instantly, swallowing the brief echo of the suppressed shots. Someone below swore into comms. Not at her, at the realization that without her scope, those two would have flanked them in seconds. She swept the compound perimeter again, reading the gaps between movement. The storm dragged fog through the lower valley now, curtain-like, changing visibility. She adjusted the dial for range, recalibrated without thought. A flash of movement on the roof, someone climbing, not Alpha. She exhaled and shifted, tracking knees and shoulders more than heads. One shot, a slip, a fall, a body tumbling into the courtyard below with a muted thud. Inside the building, another crash, wood, metal, or bone. Hard to tell. The commander's voice came through, not to the team but to her directly on a private line. "Keep them clear until package is located." No title, no call sign, no doubt. She didn't respond. He didn't expect her to. Hale finally spoke, barely audible. "How far can you see?" She didn't answer him either. Another hostile broke into view near the southern wall, rifle angled upward, scanning the ridge. She dropped him before he could raise it fully. Alpha's team inside the building moved upward. She could trace their shadows against thin plywood and fractured windows. Hale followed one of the trails down below with his eyes, trying to map the scene the way she did. He wouldn't succeed. Not yet. maybe not ever. Rain began filling the grooves around her elbows, pooling beneath her boots. The mud where she lay was turning slick, threatening to give if she shifted wrong. She didn't. A burst of gunfire from inside the building not suppressed, shouting, a crash like someone thrown into a table, then breathing over comms that wasn't controlled anymore. Target secured, someone said, voice strained. She heard the hesitation behind the words, like the target wasn't what they expected, or wasn't intact. Then another voice, lower, grim. We've got a wounded operator. Need exfil quick. Riker again, breath ragged but alive. She heard the wetness in his voice, blood or rain. Only one of those made him sound scared. The commander answered, wrap and move. Overwatch will clear your exit. She angled her rifle toward the path leading to the extraction corridor. Movement already stirring along the outer fence. Not many, 4, maybe 5, but positioned well enough to catch Alpha Midrun if left alive. Hale tensed beside her, watching the same area. She didn't hesitate. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 bodies dropped before the 5th realized what was happening and started to retreat behind a concrete barrier. She waited until he leaned out again, cautious, shaking, then ended it with a short breath. The channel was quiet except for rain and footsteps, and the distant thump of someone being dragged. Hale looked at her like he was seeing something impossible stitched into human shape. She didn't look back. The mission wasn't done, and the part no one was ready to face hadn't even begun. The call for extraction didn't come with panic, but with the kind of breath that carried bone-deep urgency. She could hear it in the way Riker's voice clipped off the ends of words as he spoke into comms. We're moving. Package and 1 down. North corridor to exfil route. The wounded operator wasn't dead, not yet. She could tell by the way the footsteps staggered in pairs, one man half carrying the weight of another. Somewhere in that rain-dark building, blood was spreading across floorboards, and the air would already be thick with the smell of iron. She peeled her eye from the scope for half a second and checked the slope leading down from her position. Mud, rocks, sparse branches. One misstep and Hale would slide off the ridge like loose gear. She rose to a crouch, rifle still tight in her arms. Stay down, she said without looking at him. He didn't argue. Maybe he understood now that instruction from her wasn't suggestion. Below, the compound stirred back to life in broken pockets. A door slammed somewhere deep in the eastern wing. Someone shouted in a language Hale probably didn't understand. Gunfire answered, not hers this time, but close range. Inside a hallway thick with shadows the team had already passed through. She dropped to prone again and resumed scanning the outer yard. The extraction route was a narrow breach in the fence at the northern edge of the compound, shielded by 2 retaining walls and a sloped runoff ditch thick with wet brush. It wasn't designed for speed. It was designed for leaving without being seen. But she saw the flaw before anyone inside did. 2 hostiles emerged near the generator stack, cutting across the yard in a direct line toward the fence, moving like they'd been trained to intercept rather than chase. No panic in their stride, no confusion. These weren't the same kind of guards Alpha had been dropping. One of them spoke into a radio. She couldn't hear the words, but the body language was enough. Reinforcement was being called, not warned. She adjusted her aim. 1 down, she said softly as the first bullet found its target. The second hostile hesitated, not ducking but redirecting his gaze upward as though he could see through storm and darkness. Her next shot removed the question. Another voice burst through the channel, breathless. We're at hallway junction. Then static, then silence. Hale tensed beside her, shifting to look through his binoculars. He couldn't see inside the building, only the outer path she'd been clearing. That was all he was meant to see. Lightning split the sky again, thunder punching a beat behind it. The storm was nearly on top of them now, and she knew comms would degrade soon. She slid her thumb over the mic switch. Status. A pause followed by the commander, not Riker. Alpha regrouping on level 1. Wounded stable. We have the target. The way he said the last word, target, not package, told her something had changed. She didn't waste time guessing. Exit north, she said, not a suggestion. No one contradicted her this time. Through the scope she saw movement at the main structure's lower exit, 4 figures, one limping, one dragging weight, 2 flanking. Riker at the back, Hale's partner Cole taking point. The target was barely visible between them, head down, arms bound. She tracked the path ahead of them, sweeping for anything that looked like intent. The rain was hammering so hard now that puddles were forming in seconds, mud sucking at their boots as they moved. A flash of movement near the secondary barracks. 2 figures cutting across the open yard, fast. She fired once, the round punching through both when they aligned for a breath. Keep moving, she said into the open channel before anyone inside could react. They reached the first retaining wall and huddled low, catching breath, checking the wounded. She could see the blood staining the thigh of the operator being supported, deep, spreading, not lethal yet. Then a voice she hadn't heard all night, young but strained, said, "The target's not what Intel briefed." Not her concern, not yet. She shifted aim farther east. Shadows flickered there, but none shaped like rifles. Only then did she speak again. "You have 20 seconds before the South Tower mobilizes." Riker answered, his voice stripped of tone, "Moving now." They moved. Hale breathed slower beside her, but his hands were clenched tight around his binoculars. His knuckles were white. Whatever he'd imagined Overwatch meant, it wasn't this, death preempted before it had time to notice itself. 3 hostiles came into view at the far side of the yard, near the western drainage ditch. They were too far to see Alpha, but close enough to hear movement soon. She took the first at the knee, the second at the throat, the third through the eye when he ducked left. Someone in Alpha muttered, half in awe, half in disbelief, "Overwatch clear." No one corrected the tone. They reached the breach in the fence, a narrow cut behind a collapsed section of chain link, partially hidden by brush. The man hauling the wounded one had to angle sideways to fit through. The target stumbled after, nearly slipping in the mud. She scanned the ridge behind the compound. One more figure just exiting a storage outbuilding, rifle slung, head turning. He might have seen movement, he might not. She didn't give him the chance. The round hit before he lifted his weapon. His body fell against the doorframe, half inside, half out, slack in the wind. Thunder drowned the soft sound of impact. Riker's voice broke through again. "We're in the runoff path, 2 minutes to tree line." She adjusted her scope again, checking the incline they'd have to climb. Loose gravel, slick clay, exposed roots, bad terrain for haste, worse for someone bleeding. She keyed the private channel. "Hold after the ridge crest, I'll cover descent." The commander answered instead of Riker, "Acknowledged." Not thanked, not praised, just acknowledged. She slung the rifle across her back and rose into a crouch, legs slow but certain. Hale looked at her with the kind of expression soldiers wore when something rewired how they saw the world. "You leaving the position?" he asked. "Not leaving," she said, "shifting." He followed without being told, boots sliding slightly on the wet stone as they moved back along the ridge, angling toward a vantage above the runoff ditch. The storm hissed through the trees below, wind dragging the rain into their faces like nails. She dropped to prone again at the new angle, unclipped the rifle, and reacquired view of the extraction path just as Alpha crested the slope. They moved slower now, burdened, breath burning in clouds from their mouths. She could see the wounded man's leg barely holding weight, the target stumbling, wrists bound but steps defiant. Behind them the compound began to wake to full alarm, lights flaring, engines revving, shouts rising through the storm. Too late. One last cluster of hostiles broke through the main gate, sprinting toward the breach in the fence with flashlights cutting through the rain. She centered the scope, exhaled, and cut down the first two before the others saw where the shots came from. "Keep moving," she said again, though they were already moving. Lightning flashed white across the valley, freezing the world in a moment of stark outlines, bodies in motion, breath in the air, rifle in hand, rain clinging to skin like memory. When the thunder rolled and silence returned, she looked out over the compound and knew the ridge wouldn't hold them safe forever. But for now, they would make it. And for the first time since the briefing room, someone in Alpha whispered a word not meant for her to hear, but carried up the channel anyway. "Respect." She didn't smile. Not yet. Because somewhere ahead, in the darkness beyond the trees, the truth about that tattoo was waiting, and the night wasn't done testing who deserved to know it. The tree line swallowed them slowly, not graciously. Branches slapped against shoulders, mud clung to every step, and the storm forced the earth to breathe in shallow gasps beneath their boots. Visibility dropped the deeper they went into the brush, where the runoff path narrowed into a trench carved by water and time. The wounded man's right leg gave out twice before anyone acknowledged it aloud. Riker's voice came through the channel, ragged but controlled. "We need cover to patch him before ascent. He's losing too much." She'd already mapped the terrain ahead, a split in the hillside where stormwater had carved a recess beneath the exposed roots of a fallen tree, concealed from above, tight enough that light wouldn't bleed out if they worked fast. She shifted her aim and scanned the path behind them. No pursuit yet, just the echo of engines firing up at the compound. She spoke without hesitation. 20 meters ahead, on your left, stay low." No one challenged her directions now. The team half carried, half dragged the wounded man into the hollow while two operators secured the perimeter. The target, wrist still bound, breathing hard through what might have been fear or fury, sank down near the base of the roots. Mud streaked his face, hair plastered to his forehead, eyes flicking from man to man like he was indexing threat levels. Hale crouched beside her at the ridge edge, rain running off his helmet in lines. They had a vantage over the hollow and the slope behind, but no easy exit if things turned fast. She rechecked her magazine, then shifted prone again. The mud beneath her chest was nearly liquid now, sucking at her vest but not deep enough to matter. In the hollow, someone tore open a trauma kit. The wounded man, Ramirez, she recalled from the operation file, grunted as they applied pressure to his thigh. The bullet had gone through flesh, not bone, but damage that deep and that wet would turn infection into a timer if they didn't move soon. The commander arrived last into the hollow, one hand gripping the target's elbow hard enough to leave marks. He wasn't winded, but his silence carried a warning, the kind that came from too many missions gone almost wrong. 3 minutes, she said into comms. Then you move. Storm will mask the exit trail but not the delay. One of the operators muttered, "Copy," without question. Hale lowered his binoculars and looked at her. "You're not staying on the ridge." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. He understood the implication. If pursuit came before the others moved, she wouldn't hold position. She'd intercept. Below, Ramirez bit down on a strip of gauze as pressure bandaging tightened around his wound. Blood still seeped, diluted by rain, but the flow slowed. The target sat with his back to the tree, arms bound in front of him now instead of behind. His breathing steadied as if he'd accepted a reality none of them had spoken yet. A flash of light flared beyond the compound, headlights, maybe, or search beams. Thunder smothered any engine sounds before they reached the ridge. She scanned the tree line beyond the hollow, tracing the wet earth where tracks would wash away within minutes. The commander spoke into the channel, voice cutting through the rain. "Ramirez holds until extraction. Hale, Cole, take point for lead out. I'm on the target." He didn't assign her. He didn't have to. She adjusted her position to cover their route, a narrow incline that would take them over the next ridge and into the drainage basin, where the secondary team would be waiting with transport, if the storm didn't ground them first. Movement flickered at the edge of her vision, not from the hollow, but back toward the compound. 3 figures, maybe 4, emerging from the tree line below, angling wide rather than direct pursuit. Smart. They knew the terrain, or someone was guiding them. She tracked the lead and marked the distance in her head, 300 meters, descending line of sight, no clean angle through the branches yet. To her left, Hale finally saw them too, his breath caught not in fear but in calculation. How far? Far enough, she said. He realized what that meant. She wouldn't shoot yet, not until the angle promised finality. In the hollow, Ramirez tried to stand and failed. Cole grabbed his vest and supported his weight silently. The target rose without waiting for instruction, then flinched when the commander yanked his arm to steer him uphill. Riker keyed the mic briefly, moving in 10. She didn't reply. Her focus narrowed to the figures below, the ones cutting a path that might intersect the runoff trench if they corrected their angle even slightly. She centered the reticle and followed the lead man's gait, balanced, confident, not rushed. Not standard security, not militia, something else. Thunder broke again, closer, shaking the breath out of the sky. 9, 8, 7. She fired. The round took the lead figure through the chest, the force turning him mid-stride before he fell into the mud. The others scattered, but not far. Rain masked their panic, but not their panic sound. She fired again, and the second man dropped. Hale tracked the third with his naked eye, counting breaths under his breath like he'd started mimicking her timing. The fourth vanished behind brush. "Go," she said into comms. Riker didn't hesitate. The team moved, Ramirez slung over 2 shoulders, the target pushed ahead by the commander. Mud sucked at their boots, the incline fighting every step they took. She kept her scope aimed at the brush where the fourth man vanished. The storm shifted direction again, wind ripping water sideways across the ridge. She tasted copper on the air, blood, metal, friction. Then the fourth emerged, low and deliberate, rifle angled upward toward the movement along the slope. She fired, and his head snapped back before his body dropped into shadow. They reached the halfway point on the incline, breath loud through comms now, the slope turning from mud to slick stone. Cole slipped once and caught himself with a hand against a root. The target stumbled again but didn't fall. She shifted her aim to sweep the lower tree line. No more movement, not yet. Then, faint through static, someone from the team muttered, 2 minutes to crest. She rose into a crouch, rifle steady, eyes scanning for anything alive and angry enough to follow. Hale mirrored her a second later, though his breathing betrayed the tremor in his muscles. "You're going with them," he said, not asking. She didn't look at him. "You'll stay and cover the trail." He blinked once. "Me." "You saw them, now you finish seeing." He didn't argue. Fear flickered across his expression, but not the kind that made men freeze. The kind that made them realize responsibility had a cost. She started moving along the ridge, angling down to intersect the team from above. The rain turned the earth into something that clutched at every step. She didn't slow. Below, the last of the team crested the incline, disappearing beyond the rise. The target's head turned once, eyes scanning the ridge behind them like he sensed something had shifted in the dark. Hale settled into her former position, rifle up, hand steadier than before. She didn't check if he was aiming in the right direction. Some lessons weren't finished until a man decided he'd either survive them or not. The storm finally broke overhead with a roar that flattened the trees and drowned all sound but breath and pulse. And somewhere in that cacophony, the next danger, the one no one had named yet, began to move closer. Because men didn't send trained hunters into a storm for a prisoner, unless the prisoner was worth more than anyone had been told. And the night hadn't released its grip on the truth she carried under that ink, not yet. The ridge leveled just enough for movement to find rhythm again, but the storm made the earth tilt beneath every step. The team ahead moved in a staggered line, shadows tangled with rain and breath. The target was forced forward by a hand on his shoulder, and Ramirez limped with weight balanced between Cole and another operator whose name she couldn't recall. Names were luxuries out here. Function mattered more. She followed their trail from the higher angle, boots sinking into mud that clung and then tore free in wet clumps. Trees thickened ahead, their trunks bending beneath the wind's shove. The extraction basin was still a kilometer north, and the route between here and their cut across terrain that turned hostile even without enemy fire. Behind her, Hale watched the lower approach from her former nest, rifle sighted down a path he could no longer afford to misjudge. Whether he knew it or not, he just inherited the weight of the margin between survival and pursuit. Static flickered on the channel, wind interfering now, storm tightening its fist around the valley. She caught only fragments of someone's voice. 30 minutes, window closing. Not good. That meant exfil was time-sensitive, maybe airlift, maybe ground transport that couldn't loiter. The storm would turn the basin trail into sludge and the sky into a wall. If they weren't there by the mark, they'd be alone against whatever recovered faster, the weather, or the men they'd just humiliated. She descended the slope at an angle and intersected the team just as they reached the first bend in the trail. Riker glanced back, eyes catching hers for the briefest moment, not in acknowledgement, not in dismissal, simply verifying she was where she was supposed to be. That alone marked a shift. Ramirez stumbled, and Cole barked something short to steady him. The commander didn't look back at her, but his tone over the channel carried no trace of the earlier distance. Keep the ridge behind covered every 50. Hale has rear. She didn't correct him. Hale didn't carry the full rear alone, not while she could still fire. The target finally spoke, voice rough from disuse or defiance. "You're moving me like cargo. You don't even know what you're carrying." Riker snarled low, "Shut it." But the commander paused just long enough to send a message without turning. "He talks again, tape him." The target smiled, not wide, not mocking, but bitter. Rain dripped from his jawline as if the storm were trying to erase expression before it formed. She scanned the trees ahead, not the conversation. Words didn't kill people here. Hesitation did. The wind dragged fog low across the trail, weaving through undergrowth. Visibility shrank to shapes and silhouettes. Every now and then, she could feel the thrum of thunder through the ground, a dull warning beneath the mud. Halfway to the basin, the trail split left, a route she knew the commander wouldn't take. Too exposed along the ridgeline. They veered right instead, into thicker cover where brush slapped at weapons and branches clawed at their packs. Rain hammered the leaves overhead, dripping through gaps like glass beads falling from a broken string. Ramirez groaned under his breath. Cole muttered, "Stay with me, don't fade." The target stumbled again, and this time the commander yanked him upright so hard the man's breath caught in his throat. Lightning flashed white through the canopy, revealing trunks and roots and stones for a blink. Then darkness swallowed everything again. She heard Hale once over the comms, faint through static. No movement behind yet. She scanned the slope to their rear, catching only the suggestion of brush shifting with wind. But she'd been hunted before. She knew the difference between storm movement and human pursuit, and the storm wasn't the only thing learning their cadence. They progressed another 60 meters before Riker raised his fist to halt the column. The trail ahead dipped into a gully where water flowed in a thin sheet over slick rock. To cross meant noise and exposure, but to go around meant adding 10 minutes they didn't have. The commander keyed his mic. 2 ahead to clear crossing, overwatch left flank. She moved without waiting, cutting through brush to gain a lateral view of the gully. From here she could track the team's descent, and the darkness beyond the slope should anything follow. She went prone at the ridge edge, sightline angled down. Rain soaked the ground beneath her in seconds. Mud pressed against her ribs again. Cole helped Ramirez down the incline, while Riker and another operator scouted the far side. The target slipped once and nearly fell into the water, but the commander hauled him forward with wordless irritation. Then a shape at the edge of her vision, not behind, ahead. Farther north, beyond the gully, two figures moved between trees, low, fast, coordinated. Too far for clarity, but close enough that their trajectory intersected the team's exit path. She didn't speak into the open comm. Instead, she used the private channel, the one rarely used except by those who had earned the right. Two ahead, 30 meters past crossing, armed, moving to flank your exit. Riker froze mid-step and pressed Ramirez against a tree. Cole ducked low, scanning but not seeing. The commander didn't ask for confirmation. He adjusted direction, steering the team off the main path and into a thicket that would reroute them closer to a rockfall she had mapped earlier with her eyes. The figures ahead slowed, likely listening to the storm for signs of movement. She could have taken a shot, but a miss in this wind would draw attention instead of end it. Hale's voice came through, thinner now. Possible movement in the low trees south side. Good, he saw something, or felt it. One of the hostiles ahead shifted, exposing a shoulder through the brush. She fired. The round caught him clean through the neck, his body folding silently into moss and mud. The other turned instinctively toward the shot, then dropped a second later when her next round punched through his sternum. No one on comm spoke for a while. The commander finally said, "Move." They crossed the gully fast, water lapping boots, mud dragging at heels. She waited until the last man cleared the incline before pulling back and relocating without sound. Hale remained her ghost in the rear. They pressed deeper into forest shadow, thunder rolling so close it shook bark off the trees. Each flash of lightning drew the world in stark white lines before the dark reclaimed it. Ramirez staggered again and almost went down. Riker caught him under the arm, frustration replaced now by some grudging instinct to keep the man alive. The target watched all of them, not with fear, but with something colder, something that suggested he'd expected worse. He glanced back once at the ridge where Hale now crouched, trying to mimic the same vigilance she'd shown. She paused just long enough at the next rise to scan the valley behind them. No shapes, no muzzle flash, only storm and darkness. But instinct coiled in her spine, a tension built from too many nights where silence lied before striking. She keyed the commander's private line again. "You're not clear of them." His reply came without pause, "I know." Then he added something quieter, not for the others, not even for her, but because the storm had stripped pretense away. "And I know who you are." She didn't answer, because the night hadn't finished what it came to test. And the truth behind that tattoo, the one none of them deserved to know yet, was woven into something older than their doubt, older than this mission, older than fear. One more ridge. One more storm front. And someone was still coming. The storm dimmed the world into shades of motion and breath, but not enough to hide intent. The forest ahead funneled into a narrow corridor of rock and roots, a natural choke point carved by water long before any war touched this valley. The team pressed through it single file, not by choice but by terrain. The wounded slowed them. The target slowed them more. Her boots found firmer ground as the incline shifted upward again. The air tasted different here, colder, thinner, carrying the scent of pine and stone instead of mud and metal. Lightning stitched itself across the sky, then vanished behind the canopy, leaving the dark darker than before. Hale's voice crackled faint through static in the rear. No movement behind, yet. Yet, he'd learned the word properly this time. She stayed parallel to the team, a few meters offset through the trees, not walking the trail but stalking beside it. Rainwater coursed down the slope in thin streams, turning ferns into slick traps beneath the brush. Her rifle never dipped. The commander moved the target ahead of him now, not trusting him behind their line. Ramirez stumbled again, breath wet with pain, but he didn't drop. Cole gripped his vest and pushed him forward when his legs lagged. Riker scanned the left flank, jaw tight, something heavy behind his eyes. He still hadn't spoken a word to her directly, but the shape of his silence had changed. Not acceptance, recognition. They crested the ridge's midpoint, the basin still out of sight beyond a second rise and a shallow ravine. The extraction team would be waiting somewhere in those shadows, unless the storm grounded them or command had rerouted without warning. A rumble through comms suggested the window was shrinking. Something about weather sealing, something about fuel, something about 15 minutes before abort. Abort wasn't an option. Not out here. Not with the target breathing and Ramirez bleeding and something still tracking them through the dark. She paused at a moss-covered outcrop and scanned downslope. Nothing moved. But instinct whispered a different truth. Something was packing their retreat, not close enough to see, but close enough to wait. She keyed the commander's private line again. They're not chasing, they're circling. He didn't ask how she knew, he didn't ask how many. He only said distance. She measured the silence, not the sound. 200 meters, maybe less. Your ascent route is predictable. They know the basin path. Static swallowed whatever he replied, but movement ahead stuttered only briefly before continuing. The trees thinned near the top of the rise, exposing slivers of sky where clouds churned like bruises. Thunder crawled across the ridge a heartbeat later. She shifted right, climbing an angle the others didn't take, giving her sightline over the ravine before they reached it. The mud tried to pull her down twice. It didn't. Below, the target stumbled again and twisted to look back, rain dripping off his brow. His eyes found hers by accident in the dark, a flicker of something unreadable before the commander shoved him forward again. She didn't break stride. 3 more minutes and they'd reach the ridge crest overlooking the basin. If extraction was there, lights would stay off until signal. If extraction wasn't there, the storm would eat them alive before the men tracking them did. Hale's breath flared once in her earpiece, a sharp inhale. Then, I see them. Not panic, not bravado, just the words. She dropped to her belly at the outcrop and sighted back down into the trees they'd passed through. Shapes moved between trunks too disciplined to be scattered, too careful to be blind. 7. No, 8. Spacing like they'd practiced this kind of pursuit. Riker must have heard Hale too. Rear contact. She keyed open channel this time. 8. 2 squads or 1 split, 30 meters behind his last mark. They're waiting for sound. Cole muttered something that wasn't prayer, but might have been mistaken for one. The commander spoke to her alone on private. You holding or thinning? She didn't blink. Thinning is waste. I'll divert. His reply carried no argument. Do it. She slid downslope before anyone could mark her position, boots silent in rain-soft moss, hands guiding her between trunks until her angle broke from the team entirely. The darkness swallowed her like it remembered her from another life. She moved fast but not loud, a ghost threading the space between roots and stone and shadow. The storm covered what little disturbance she made. Thunder and wind became her camouflage. The men tracking them slowed as the terrain slanted upward. One knelt to check a footprint half filled with runoff. Another scanned ahead with a suppressed rifle raised. She took the farthest man first. The suppressed shot cracked like a cough swallowed by thunder. He dropped sideways into ferns without kicking. The second turned sharply, scanning the wrong angle. He died before his brain could place direction. The others froze for a breath, then shifted formation, not panicking, not running. Good training. Hired or military, they'd been sent to retrieve, not retaliate. She fired twice more, then slid left to break her own line of sight before they could triangulate. A branch snapped behind her and she dropped to a knee, ready to pivot. Hale's voice came through again. Two peeling off toward the ravine. You've got. The rest cut out in static. She exhaled, tracking the movement she hadn't seen but now believed. The fifth man broke cover to flank wide. She dropped him mid-step, the round punching through collar and lung. The storm drowned the sound of impact. That left three. She scanned up the ridge. The team was still moving, slower now, but moving. Ramirez was nearly being dragged. The target kept his feet somehow. The commander hadn't looked back once. A flash of lightning lit the trees again, and she caught a silhouette trying to use the terrain to blindside her. She fired and watched him drop. Two left. Wind howled through the trees like something feral. Rain turned the world to blur and motion. A voice not on comms but live, somewhere near the bodies. Hold fire, check targets. Not English. The cadence was Slavic, the tone military, the authority real. She repositioned, belly sliding across mud slick as oil until she found a rock shelf to sight from. The last two men moved together now, one crouched, one standing guard. They didn't retreat. They slowed, hunting, not fleeing. She, steadying her lungs, waited for the thunder and fired twice more. One fell backward into a stump. The other tried to return fire blindly, but the muzzle flash betrayed him. She ended it. Silence returned like a held breath exhaled. Then Hale over comms, voice lower, steady in a way it hadn't been hours ago. Rear clear, for now. She didn't answer. She was already moving. The ridge ahead brightened faintly, not with light, but with space. The basin lay beyond it, and whatever waited there would either take them home or bury them in the dark. And somewhere between the mud and the men she'd just killed, the truth about the tattoo pressed against her skin like a heartbeat she refused to name. The storm wasn't finished. And neither was the night. The basin revealed itself not with sight, but with sound, the low churn of rotors fighting crosswind, the thud of landing gear straining against soaked earth, the clipped urgency of voices speaking into headsets over the storm. The tree line opened into a clearing shaped by old erosion and newer necessity. The extraction bird crouched in the mud like something alive and cornered, its lights blacked out, tail angled toward the narrow ascent trail the team had just begun to breach. The commander led the target forward with a shove that nearly sent him to his knees again. Ramirez was half carried by Cole and another operator, his blood mixing with the rain until the color disappeared into the ground. Riker moved last in line, his rifle angled back toward the trees they'd come from, jaw clenched tight enough she could sense it even from meters away. She emerged at their flank from a direction none of them saw her leave, mud streaking her sleeve, rifle still hot. Hale followed a moment later, pale and quiet, scanning the rear like someone who just aged a year in half an hour. The crew chief waved them low and fast toward the ramp. No one celebrated. No one spoke above necessity. The storm clawed at the airframe, testing its weight, daring it to lift. Ramirez was loaded first, laid flat along the inside wall as a medic cut into his pant leg with a blade and cursed at the depth of the wound. The target was shoved to the opposite bulkhead and forced to sit, hands still bound, shoulders heaving with shivered breath. He didn't complain. He didn't ask questions. He stared at the floor like someone marking time by counting his own heartbeat. Riker climbed aboard next, eyes scanning past the crew, past the target, past the medic, landing for the smallest second on her. He didn't nod. He didn't offer thanks. But he didn't avoid her gaze, and that alone rewrote something unspoken in the air between them. The commander paused by the ramp and swept the tree line one last time. Thunder rolled overhead like the sky was cracking. The rain had turned to sheets now, the drops so dense they blurred everything beyond 10 meters into smudged silhouettes. She was already moving to the perimeter, not inside. Hale hesitated at the ramp's edge as if expecting her to follow. She didn't. She slung her rifle across her back and waded through shin-deep mud toward the far side of the clearing. The commander watched her for a second, then spoke a single word into his headset. The crew chief held the ramp but didn't close it. She knelt at the edge of the tree line, eyes adjusting to the dark beyond the noise. She listened, not for breath or footfall, but for intent. The men she'd dropped in the rear were dead, but death didn't guarantee they were the only ones sent. A moment passed, long enough for the storm to shift direction again, long enough for the cold to settle deeper into her bones. She didn't flinch when the commander approached, boots sinking beside hers. "They're not regrouping?" he asked, not doubting, just confirming. "Not within range," she said. He exhaled through his nose, like that answer fit something he'd already decided. "You're soaked through." She didn't react. He spoke again, quieter now, as if the storm itself didn't deserve to hear. "You disappeared for 3 years." "Not a question." She scanned the slope one last time before answering. "I wasn't lost." He nodded once, eyes still forward. "They said you were done, that incident on the tarmac." He didn't finish. She didn't dignify it with breath. "A beat, then, that tattoo. You still wear it under the sleeve." She didn't look at him. "It's not for them." His jaw flexed. "You saved men tonight who said you shouldn't be on the roster." "They weren't wrong," she said. He almost smiled at that, but the storm wasn't a place where smiles belonged. She rose without waiting for dismissal and started back toward the aircraft. The commander watched her leave the tree line, then followed. As she stepped onto the ramp, the medic glanced up from Ramirez and froze mid-motion. Not from fear, from realization. Hale slid past her to take the jump seat across from the target, who watched her with a gaze too calm for someone in cuffs. She knelt just inside the ramp and braced one hand against the inner wall, scanning the clearing one final time. The crew chief raised 2 fingers, a signal, not a question. She nodded once. The ramp closed with a hydraulic groan, sealing out the rain but not the cold. The engines roared, blades churning mud and water into spirals that vanished into the dark above. The aircraft lifted, not steady at first. The storm cursed their ascent, then relented. Inside, no one spoke. Ramirez's breathing slowed as the medic worked. Cole sat with his head back against the bulkhead, eyes closed but not asleep. Riker stripped mud from his gloves in silence. Hale watched the floor like it held the last truth left in the world. The target lifted his gaze when the commander passed him. "They won't let you keep me," he said calmly. The commander didn't slow. "They won't ask your permission." A flicker of teeth flashed, not a grin, not fear. "You think you know what they sent for?" The commander's eyes darkened. "I know what we take." The target laughed once quietly. "You don't know what she is." It was said without malice, more like warning. His eyes slid toward her then, low, deliberate, before he looked away again. Riker narrowed his gaze. Hale stiffened. Cole opened his eyes. No one spoke the question turning in their heads. She sat against the wall near the ramp, head lowered, rain still dripping from her hair onto the floor. The sleeve of her jacket had torn near the elbow. Mud and blood and water had washed the edges of the ink upward, just enough for the faint outline to show through the fabric. Not the whole symbol, just a shape, a fragment. The commander saw it and said nothing. The storm battered the aircraft until the basin was a memory, swallowed behind cloud and night. Hale finally looked at her, not with fear, not with awe, with the expression of someone whose beliefs had lost their voice. He opened his mouth, then shut it again. He knew better than to ask. No one on that aircraft had saluted her. Not yet. But silence had shifted. And long before dawn broke over the basin they'd escaped, every man on board would carry one truth in his bones, whether he spoke it aloud or not. Sometimes dignity doesn't argue. It doesn't warn, it doesn't demand. It simply acts. And when it does, even the storm holds its breath.